Hello and welcome to the Guardian Ashes Weekly, supported by Qantas, the spirit of Australia. That wasn't great, was it? There were moments, tiny moments of hope. Zach Crawley getting a run, a few in fact. Finally that century for Joe Root, and then when it was too late, some real fight from Ben Stokes and Will Jacks. Why is it only okay not to Bazball when the game is already done? But still, for a tiny moment, you started to dream. And you shouldn't have done. Australia can catch, they can bowl, they can bat. We were warned about Mitchell Starc with the pink ball, but not with the bat too. And when England did turn up, Michael Neser just put it on a sixpence for about 10 hours, not to mention a masterclass in wicket-keeping from Alex Carey. For England, too many easy wickets, Pope and Brook again, all of them with the ball. Years of planning this pace attack, and we're undone by medium pace with a keeper standing up, and those drop catches, agony. And now some golf in Noosa, a great chance to say optics a lot. What changes then for Adelaide? And unless there's a turnaround in performances, does anyone carry the can? I'm Max Rushden, and unfortunately, it's my job to look back at the second test at the Gabba on the Guardian Ashes Weekly. There are no weak men on this podcast. Guardian cricket correspondent Ali Martin. Welcome, Ali.
Morning, Max. The morning after the night before, and pretty grisly, I've got to say.
Guardian cricket writer Jim Wallace here too. Hey, Jim.
Hello. Very good morning.
And good morning, Guardian Australia's Geoff Lemon. All right, Geoff?
Yes, very well. It's a lovely, cloudy day in Brisbane, and it rained biblically overnight, but at least it's not raining today to make England supporters feel even worse that they weren't able to escape.
Yeah, so Australia win the second test by 8 wickets. Michael says, does the panel feel they've over-prepared for the pod? We'll get to what Baz McCullum said afterwards. The 8th time in 10 series that England have been 2 down after 2. So we shouldn't be too despondent. This is what happens, but it feels bleak, Ali.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, it's certainly familiar territory, and England have now gone 17 test matches without a win in Australia, which is a pretty howling streak. And of course, people thought it was going to be different this time, and not without good reason, but there is a sort of unique challenge to playing cricket in Australia that possibly England didn't budget for, and, that chiefly comes down to the bounce of Perth, the pink ball test. They're two very alien sets of conditions for English cricketers, and you'd have to say that they have pretty much walked into a trap, and at times kind of voluntarily so.
Yeah, here's a trap. Where's the door, please? Jim, I'm such a stupid England fan. I'm so desperate to win that I cling to these moments of hope. And there were moments, when Stokes and Jacks are digging in, I think, we could still be back. This could go on. When Root got that century, I don't know. I'm just an idiot, basically, because everything is telling you that this won't happen. And ultimately, they fell so short.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there was hope. That line is getting sort of bandied around again, the hope that kills you. There was no hope yesterday, but there was some fight and there was some heart and ticker, as they say in cricket. So that was heartening to see. But Australia bowled so well that England couldn't get away from them. So even though Stokes and Jacks stayed in there, they weren't progressing the run rate sufficiently to ever really be within a chance of setting a demanding target. And I guess, when Australia really needed a moment of brilliance, they got it once more. They got it from Steve Smith's diving catch at slip, which was one of the best catches you'll ever see. And Michael Neser, looking every inch like Hugh Jackman as Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. He turned up and stole England's loaves of bread 5 times over, I suppose.
Geoff, what's your overriding sense? This is the England inquest part of this, I guess, that there are two sides. Yeah. Australia played better than England, but it feels like this is a big inquest. You felt like afterwards, Stokes was really furious. You felt like there was some instant reflection, and he's, maybe from this something better will come.
Yeah, I mean, I will venture the I don't even know if it's an opinion, and the observation that there was another team playing in this match, which hasn't really come up much so far. But if you're looking at it from an England perspective, I mean, can Ben Stokes get mad at his team for playing in a way that was self-destructive when he's the one who's captaining that side and hasn't presumably told them earlier that maybe he'd like them to do things a little bit differently? So, he's out there giving the example. He's out there batting in the way that he batted, and perhaps communicating to them via that it is possible to do that. But surely that hadn't happened beforehand. You go back to the comments by Marcus Trescothick, who's supposedly in charge of the batting, that he hadn't thought to talk to anybody about driving on the up after Perth. He just relies on them to work it out for themselves. Okay, what are you there for? Why are you getting paid? Why do you have a job if you're not going to point out to your players what might be going wrong with the way that they're approaching the game? And then, I mean, for me, this England team is summed up by the fact that after that stand with Stokes and Jacks batting the way they did, immediately Gus Atkinson walks out, a guy who's got a test 100 in his first few starts, and goes, I reckon I'll just lump one straight to mid-wicket and give it up. You know, at that point, there was a possibility that if Atkinson and Carse had got together and put on tried to do a Starc and bowl and put on 70, put on 80, put on something, give yourself the slightest opportunity to be able to apply some pressure. And they couldn't even be bothered doing that. So I don't think this England team will learn anything from the way that Stokes and Jacks played. I think they'll just carry on the way it was, and the fact that McCullum comes out and says we prepared too much. I mean, that is an extraordinary thing to say because we had 5 training sessions. We prepared too much for the series we've been talking about for 4 years. Surely there was the opportunity to do something else. You talk about Smith taking that catch versus the easy, simple catches that England were putting down and then blaming it on, oh, well, it's hard to see the pink ball at night. Okay, maybe you should do more than 5 sessions trying to catch a pink ball at night. There seem to be some pretty fundamental things that could have been addressed. If this is the biggest part of your quadrennial cricket cycle, maybe this is the one you do some more lead-up work for.
Yeah, that McCullum interview was interesting, Ali. I mean, it is his way. Like, he's got a very relaxed manner, and optics is used a lot, right? And maybe you do want, I don't know why, because it's a bit like in football when a team loses, one of their players can't be seen smiling in the following week anywhere, not even like holding their new baby. They can't be happy for a week. But McCullum does sort of wander around and go, oh yeah, we lost, but you know, it's fine. And maybe it's dumb to think you just want a bit more like, I'm gutted about this from him. Because actually what you want him is to coach the team better. It doesn't really matter how he acts in that post-match. But it is strange to say, even if it's totally right, we prepared too much.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it could actually be his epitaph as head coach if results continue to track as they are, and jobs are lost. What I found interesting about it, firstly, was that he spoke to Test Match Special. He spoke to the local broadcasters, Channel 7. I'm not sure about Fox, but he also spoke to the written press as well. And in certainly in 3 of those appearances, he made that same point. So this wasn't a slip of the tongue. You know, I'm thinking back to Peter Moores after the 2015 World Cup when he said, we've got to look at the data, or we've got to look at it later. There was a bit of a mix-up as to what he actually said. It was a bit of a slip, and but McCullum wanted to make this point, and that will certainly clang back home because the perception of them being, a sort of freewheeling, quite happy-go-lucky kind of side, and then to say that we've overtrained because we did 5 sessions. Well, yeah, it's not great. My understanding of what he's trying to say, and this is not me necessarily going to bat for him, but I just want to...
Couldn't do any worse, Ellie, if you did.
So essentially what I understand by what he's trying to say is that he believes that this England team are essentially a bunch of net heroes, in that they can go into the nets and they can look $1 million. They're creaming these balls. There is zero consequence, and then it actually is out in the middle where you have to do it. And his belief is that if you hothouse in the nets like they did, and they probably actually fell into a bit of a trap of feeling like we've got to get back in the nets because they added 2 sessions to what they were originally planning to do. But I think his point is that people have almost played a test match before they've walked out there. The counter to that is, well, 2 things. One is that they were playing the pink ball format, which is a format they don't know. They had shouldered arms to Canberra. Some of the reasons for that were understandable in terms of the different conditions from Canberra coming up to a hot, humid place like Queensland. So, but you've done that. So you've made that choice. But England don't play cricket with a pink ball very often. And, seeing conditions, the different times of day, bright daylight, twilight, in the dark with the floodlights at full beam. These are aspects that the eyes have to get used to, and the players have to get used to while they're out there. And I do think they needed that. And even with those extra sessions, as Geoff said, they were dropping catches. They were not adjusting to the small nuances that Australia are so well drilled in now as to how the ebb and flow of a day-night test match goes. And particularly in terms of picking moments, it's about situational awareness. And England were completely found lacking there. I mean, I must say, Harry Brook trying to absolutely larrup Mitchell Starc's second ball of his twilight spell. You know, the spell that Starc has been held back for. You know it's coming, and it is a moment. I don't know if you have to necessarily dig in, but you're thinking in that moment, and your shot selection has to be absolutely perfect. And I'm afraid for a vice captain of the team, that was an appalling shot. But it was just one example. It really was a sort of catalogue of errors. They built up one on top of each other. And I think that point about Atkinson, and I made the point in my match report, you could look at it and say, well, you're having a go at a number 9. If the guys above him haven't done their jobs, then really, what hope is there? But Geoff's right. I mean, I think underlights, a tricky 3-figure kind of total, and you could actually put some genuine pressure on England there, on Australia there, and we saw that with Atkinson. He got a bit of low bounce to castle Travis Head, bit of extra bounce to get rid of Marnus Labuschagne. The pitch was starting to do quite a bit more, and with 120 on the board there, that could still be a game. And in that moment, Atkinson didn't have it, and that is probably a real. It's not probably. That is a real concern for England there.
Yeah, and actually, Jim, over these last 2 tests, there are so many moments like that. There are just so many moments where if he just did this, if Pope doesn't waft outside off stump, if Brook doesn't waft outside off stump, etc., there are so many moments, which I guess when you see, say, Stokes and Jacks really digging in, it's such a thrill, isn't it? Because you just don't ever see it. You're like, it's sort of like perversely what Bazball has done to you, is it's made you love the total opposite of it.
Yeah, it made you love Chris Tavare all over again.
Yeah,
I guess the first thing is that Stokes's post-match comments completely clanged with McCullum. Stokes was, he was sort of angry and contrite, and he had that sort of look in his eye where he wants to fix things, he wants to give everything, as Stokes does, to fix and solve the problem. Whereas I guess it then really does clang when McCullum sort of saunters in, with a bit of a smirk on his face, repeating this same old line. So that's a thing that I think is a problem there, because they don't look or appear like they're on the same page, and they have done for a long, long time. And the Stokes thing was interesting with the bat, in that, do you remember at the start of this project, he would sort of bat like a maniac himself, and get out quite cheaply, but playing very, very ultra aggressively. And the rationale there was that he was showing his team the way. He was showing that if he failed in that manner, then that was fine. And I think Ali and Geoff might know more than me, but I think there were words perhaps had on the third evening from Stokes to his team, and it was probably something along the lines of, we don't have to play at everything. We don't have to drive on the up. We don't have to drive at Mitchell Starc's second ball. And it was, we can do this. You can soak up pressure. Bazball, they always say, is about absorbing pressure and then putting it back on. And he was quite pointed in his post-match comments about them not in those moments of pressure, them just sort of wilting. And so it was quite heartening to see Stokes and Jacks bat in that manner, I think, because, that was just old school Test cricket. It was a couple of sessions of proper cricket, really tight bowling to tight fields and good batting, and sort of not taking on the short ball and picking off some runs.
And I don't think that's entirely new for Stokes either. That's been something like, yes, there have been those times when he's been walking down and flat batting at balls, but even through the so-called Bazball era, he's often been the one who does play the most conventionally for periods of time, when he identifies it's the right period. And even if you go back before this era, you go back to Headingley 2019, the night before he tears Australia apart the next day, he's 2 off 50 balls, sets it up, gets set, gets used to it, and then takes on the challenge the next day. So he is, in a way, the most nuanced of that top 6, top 7, even though he's the one who's supposedly the spiritual leader of it. He's the one who often has the most control and was able to demonstrate it, but there's not much point demonstrating it if you can't get your other players to follow along. And, it was something that stood out to me, that even Joe Root, who's said to be the one who's immune from this, he has, he played that one great innings, which did have a lot of restraint in it, but he's also got out the other 3 times that he's batted to a real lack of restraint and seeming to follow follow the kind of style of the players around him rather than be the one to set the style himself.
Well, we can't go for Rooty too, Geoff. Go for the other guys. You can't.
I mean, everybody's culpable. Everyone's culpable. When he's the one who's trying to steer Mitchell Starc away and chops on in Perth. He's the one who has a big lavish drive at him. Again, early in a spell, Starc's just come back. He hasn't taken a wicket in that third innings in the first couple of bursts that he had. Crawley and Duckett have dealt with him, and then he comes back on later on, and Root immediately coughs up a wicket to him straight away, driving wide of the off stump when, again, that wasn't necessary. So there's something across this entire team, and if Stokes is the one player who's not behaved that way, he's still not the player who's making it apparent enough to the others that they also don't need to behave that way all the time.
Ali, if I can take you back to the opening day, it was an amazing.
Oh yeah,
start.
please do. That was. But everything seemed fine. I'm happy to go back there. Yes.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it starts and we're all there, and suddenly we're 5 for 2, and you just think, oh, for God's sake, it's done right now. And then we did have a bit. Crawley got some runs and was batting quite well. Root obviously gets that century, and you sort of think at the end of day one, maybe because of the start was so bad that we turned it around a bit, that actually it wasn't such a bad first innings. And obviously we will never learn, and you have to see both teams bat, right? But there was some hope there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I called it a foothold. They got a foothold in the match. It wasn't a sort of defining score, and there were a couple of theories flying around on the day. One was that England had a very good day with the bat, which I think was a bit extreme. There was a lot of chat about whether England should have declared that night and whether they should have got bowling. My personal view was to take the runs. In fact, really, the way that you get the proper imposing score is to bat, right through, at least 4 sessions essentially to get into the next day, so that you're bowling with that pink new ball as twilight falls on day 2. Crawley played quite nicely that morning, and that was an intense. Well, say that morning, that afternoon, that was quite an intense bit of pressure, having lost those 2 early wickets. And I think he maybe proved a bit to himself, although he does. The number 76 seems to appear against his name quite a lot. Which is, you're kind of looking for someone to kick on there. And having, obviously I mentioned that Brook moment earlier, which, I do think that is kind of where a lot of the innings lost a lot of its runs. The Stokes run out was essentially an excellent bit of pressure built up by Australia, and an absolutely incredible bit of fielding from Josh Inglis. And I saw people afterwards saying, well, and he's a wicket keeper. Well, I'm like, well, he's also a cricketer. So, and he's a bit of a whippet, and he's also a good Yorkshire lad as well. So he will have learnt all that coming through the Yorkshire pathway when he was younger. But there was a sort of slight sense of disappointment that the Root was kind of holding up, holding the whole dam up, and there was a little bit of a late flourish from Archer. But it essentially wasn't enough.
Just on the first innings total, Ali, do you remember in the presser, Zach Crawley said we were quite happy with 260, basically? I thought that was just a real sign of wow, there's some serious Kool-Aid been drunk here, because 260 was never going to be enough on that pitch. 350 was probably never going to be enough. But I think maybe all of us got a bit swept up in the Root ton, but... no one else really did a job. Crawley threw it away. A lot of them threw it away. And so for them at the end of the day to say, we would have been happy with 260, and we'd have done it. We'd have come out with the ball and maybe done a job. Just again was one of those things where it's like, these guys, I'm not going to call them weak men, because I don't really like that sort of stuff that Stokes came out with, but sort of unthinking and a little bit blithe and a little bit sort of. What's the word? Dim, really. It's dim, and it's a bit
shit. Is shit okay or not?
There are some other words. There are plenty of words out there, but I can't quite get them at 10 in the morning in Brisbane.
Geoff, we should do an inquest into England's bowling. I just feel so gaslit by the way they bowled in the first innings at Perth. I was just, still utterly convinced that they're West Indies Mark, 80s West Indies Mark II, and that Archer first over just set the tone, didn't it? It was, like some floppy ones down the leg side, and then one really wide one down the offside. And people say he's a rhythm bowler, right? And I guess when it's working, that's great. But it sort of feels like if the rhythm isn't there, there's sort of nothing he can do.
And maybe it took him 1.9 tests to get into it because he came out breathing fire right at the end when they were defending 60. And there was no point doing it. Suddenly he's bowling 153 kilometres an hour, and it was exciting. And I'm aware that if you're Archer, obviously earlier in a match you have to hold yourself back to some degree. You can't just blow all of your energy early on in a spell if you might end up having to bowl a lot more overs than that. But it still felt telling that the most dramatic performance was one that came when there was nothing on the line, and also that even then he couldn't resist just trying to hit Steve Smith in the head. So if you're bowling 150 k's an hour, maybe put it around about the off stump. That might be quite challenging to face. Maybe bowl one at the stumps once in a while at that sort of speed and see what you can do there. But the super short pitched attack, it just felt like muscle flexing at that point. There was no point to it. And then as you say, England's bowling in the first innings was just inexplicable. Watching that first session when Head and Weatherald are taking them apart, and they've got, they win the gamble essentially with Travis Head in that he smashes a few at a quick rate for a little while, but he gets out for about 30. And that's what Travis Head will do a lot of the time if he's playing that way, right? So you've got lucky. You've got away with one that day. It's not one of those days when he's going to make 100 against you. So you've got rid of him, but then Weatherald is scoring it faster than run a ball at the other end. And he's supposed to be the subpar Shield cricketer who's only in his second test. You can imagine the way that England camp would probably look down on a player like Weatherald who's chipped away at domestic level for years and finally got his chance. Well, he took them apart as well and said afterwards, well, there was no plan to attack them. They just bowled me bad balls, so I scored off them. There was no premeditation. There was no overarching philosophy. It was like, well, I can uppercut that over the slips for 6, so I will, because they kept bowling so short. And I've rarely seen, you could hark back dreamily if you're an England fan to the days when people used to get mad at Broad and Anderson for bowling a bit back of a length. Oh, why don't they pitch it up? But I mean, this lot, everything was up around the armpit, and it just made it easy to survive, and when the line was wrong, easy to score off. So what was the point? How were you trying to get somebody out with that? And it seems like it couldn't just be errors because it was so consistent across the entire session. But again, where's your assistant coaching staff? Where's somebody on the boundary line? Where's your Alan Donald stalking around on the boundary line yelling out to his bowlers, oi, do this, come and have a drink at the cooler and let me tell you what you're about to change. Where is this intervention? Doesn't seem to be any with this team.
Yeah, I did like this question from Ryan, which says, if Archer, as Steve Smith pointed out, can only bowl fast when there's nothing going on, champion, will we see him break the speed of sound over the next 3 matches? I mean, it isn't just Archer, Ali. It is interesting that so much has gone into getting this pace attack. I think I said it at the top. And we are undone by Michael Neser, right, who's not fast, who's bowling just like... And the difference, I thought, between when Jackson Stokes were in and were digging in, but Australia was so tight, and when Starc and Boland were in, who are far inferior batters, but there just seemed to be no jeopardy at all for them. For that was sort of the bleakest, I don't know, it felt like about 3 days worth, that.
No, absolutely. I was thinking back to the 2019 World Cup final, which obviously England nearly lost, and had they lost that game, and well, I guess some people would say they ultimately just tied it, but it would have gone back to 10 overs of Colin de Grandhomme bowling 75-mile-an-hour nibblers. It would have been the sort of ultimate irony that a real sort of bit of county cricket there has just completely undone England. And yeah, keeper up, Michael Neser bowling 82, keeper up, real tight fields there, and that is something that England have kind of thumbed their nose at in this whole project. And they have they've looked away from county cricket. They have invested a lot in pace. Which is not to say that pace isn't important at this level. There is the stats do show that once you get above 85 and consistently hitting above 85, that is with a bit of movement when batsmen are challenged the most in Test cricket. But Max, I just want to take you to a headline in the Eastern Daily Press back home.
Please, yes.
Ex-Norfolk village cricketer impresses in Ashes for Australia. This is Jake Weatherald, who played for Great Witchingham 18 months ago up in the East Anglian Premier League.
Amazing.
And this is not done not chucking shade at Jake Weatherall. What I'm actually impressed with by Jake Weatherall is that he is a guy that went out of his way to improve himself and to find some overseas cricket when there wasn't any available. He's not interested in the cheap cash, the quick cash of T20 cricket. He was about self-improvement and playing and earning that baggy green. And he buried his ego, went over to East Anglia and played, Premier League cricket in Norfolk. And one of the themes that's been coming up from a couple of old players that I've been chatting to about this is about match hardness. And it seems like England players really only play for England and when there's T20 cash available. There's been a bit of contempt for county cricket that has sort of spread through, and that's come from the top. That has come from pretty much the way they've selected, the way they talk about county cricket, and that players aren't necessarily match hardened, and that means long days in the dirt. It means playing, in front of no one. It means basically teaching yourself various situations and scenarios when you're out in the middle that you are prepared for. And I just wonder with England whether that point about them being net heroes, is a fair one, to be honest, because the two players who actually have the kind of game and the nous, it's not just the fact that they're 34, in their sort of mid-30s, but Joe Root and Ben Stokes are two products of pretty much the Andy Flower era. That's when they started their cricket, and at a time when the volume of cricket was not considered a bad thing. There wasn't talk about kind of burnout, and there wasn't guys kind of thinking, I'm just going through the motions in county cricket. What's the point? I just wonder whether there is a sort of lack of underlying hardness in a lot of these players who have an incredible lifestyle. They get all the best facilities, but just don't play as much as they used to. And that's, this is obviously, this will probably be heard as a kind of, now we're going to go the other way and it's going to be dig in and all those valleys. It's not necessarily about that, but I just feel that the volume of cricket that is played could be one of the factors that is undoing England in a place like Australia, which is one of the hardest tours to play on.
Apparently Weatherall at Great Witchingham got ruffled a few feathers because he was sort of telling the blokes who had jobs in the week, you need to try harder, you need to dig in, you need to be more hungry for runs. And they were like, hang on a minute, I'm a head teacher on Monday morning. And he's like, no, you got to grind it out and all that sort of stuff. So I did think that was quite funny when I read a few pieces about him there. But I thought I was chatting to a few people last night and saying that there are some players that in Baz ball sort of prosper and others that aren't, and are sort of their talents are being wasted. And Harry Brook potentially falls into that. But the Ollie Pope thing, obviously, there'll be a lot of heat about his role now, with Bethel getting a few runs for the Lions, and Pope being the one big question mark, I guess, before the series, and the manner in which he batted. He didn't seem like someone who had the pressure taken away from him at all. Apart from that first innings in Perth where he batted quite calmly and smoothly for 46, he's been batting like a bloke with a bee in his boxer shorts since. He's back to his frenetic jabbing, all that sort of stuff. And so I wonder if there's something in that this regime works for a few people, but it really is sort of maybe ruining a few sort of very, very talented English cricketers.
Interestingly, that's what Jake Weatherall said. He said to the Great Witchingham teachers, just get a bee in your boxer shorts, get out there in the nets. Who cares if you've got to be, putting scaffolding up tomorrow morning? Geoff, hold that thought. We'll end part one. We'll be back in a second. Hello, Max Rushden here.
And I'm Geoff Lemon.
The Guardian Ashes Weekly is supported by Qantas, the spirit of Australia, and that's not an empty claim. You don't have to wait until you get there. Qantas aims to showcase what's great about the country the moment you step on board. Which brings up a question, Geoff. What do you reckon is the best thing about Australia, putting cricket to one side?
I think that you have to say the food. We've got great producers, fresh ingredients. It's part of the Australian way of life in the modern world, and Australian chefs, Australian producers have had an influence on food around the world.
And you could definitely expect great food from down under on a Qantas flight, featuring menus specially designed for healthier long-haul travelling. What else, Geoff?
I'm going to nominate, controversially, Australian hospitality, which might not always be completely present at the ground if you're an England player. But I think once you get outside the cricket ground, people are, in the main, very welcoming, happy to have visitors and happy to chat to you about where you're from, what you're doing and where you should be going.
And there's lots of that on a Qantas flight to Australia. Nobody knows Australia like Qantas. Book now at Qantas.com. Welcome to part 2 of the Guardian Ashes Weekly. I stopped you in your prime, Geoff. What did you want to say?
Well, just going on from what Jim was talking about with Ollie Pope and pressure and whether Jacob Bethel will come in. I mean, he's the only option, really. He's the only spare bat. So it means a couple of things. One, there can only be pressure on one other player at a time. Everybody else is completely assured of their spots. And two, for me, Bethel, who I'm sure is a talented player, and I've seen him clout a few balls in white ball cricket, and he can bowl a bit, and he's got fantastic hair and all the rest of it. But, you know, if you want someone who's sort of playing a villain in anime, who's going to ride a motorbike into an office building and jump it out the window or something, great, he's your guy. But I think nothing sums up this regime for me more than the fact that your spare bat on an Ashes tour, whose most likely spot to have to come in would be number 3 unless they rejig the order, is a guy who's never made a first-class 100 and who's played a bare couple of seasons of domestic cricket. It seems insane to me that you've had histories of players making 10 hundreds in county seasons to bash their way into the Test team, and often only been there for a short amount of time because they failed. And under the way that the current England camp do things, oh well, you look good. We like the way you smack it over long on, so you're potentially first drop in the Ashes. None of that makes any sense to me from my life of watching cricket. And I know there's very much a view within that England camp that we know a lot more than everybody else, and everyone else is a moron. But a tour like this and the way it's unfolding does cause a bit of a recalculation in the who is a moron index.
Just that point about Jacob Bethel. I mean, that kind of sums up what I was talking about in terms of match hardness, because he's had a completely almost wasted summer in England in the build up to this. There's been a lot of time, in the group, as you know, with the boys. And not actually playing for his county when these guys should be dispatched off to play. They should want to play. That's kind of where I get a bit concerned for this England team. And in terms of how they might rejig the team or whether there are changes to be made, I mean, Ollie Pope is certainly under pressure at number 3. But the guy that I would be most concerned about at the moment is Jamie Smith, who is on his first Ashes tour. And I don't think he's necessarily coping particularly well. And, as a player with sort of dual demands of wicket-keeping and batting, that is a problem. I wonder whether there could even be a reversion to what they did in New Zealand 12 months ago, where Ollie Pope drops down and takes the gloves. He is, he really is a sort of lower middle order batsman anyway. And then whether your number 3 is a Bethel, or you could even look at Jacks and say, well, he has held up pretty well. He could move up to the top of the order, and that still allows you to have the spin bowling option and then play the 5 quicks. Because I do think that England, they're going to Adelaide, and it is a place where you probably do want spin. But the problem with 4 quicks and the demands on the attack is what that asks of Ben Stokes as the 4th seamer. And so this is just me kind of spitballing it. And I suspect that won't be the way they go. But everything gets slightly out of balance. So the 5 quicks things is really what kind of gets the best out of Stokes. But more broadly on that bowling attack is that for a while, the bowling attack, it doesn't necessarily have a leader. I'd say that the attack leader is Ben Stokes coming on as the 4th seamer. And that they just sort of look a bit rudderless there. And there will be people saying, well, where's Jimmy? And, Jimmy's time was done. But in that time since, in terms of someone who has been consistently able to be on the park and playing, that hasn't materialised. There's been injuries. This attack, Archer, Atkinson, Carse, has kind of almost been thrown together for this. So, yeah, I would say that it hasn't been 4 years of planning for this Ashes. I think the Ashes planning started pretty much when they told Jimmy to move on. I think it was the first 2 years of the project were kind of just about opening minds and trying to show them what was possible, relieving a lot of the kind of built-up pressure. But they have been planning for around 2 years for this, and unfortunately, as much as they've identified the bowlers they've not been able to get them playing together due to injuries. And it looks like an attack that isn't they don't dovetail each other, particularly when you hold them up against an Australian unit, which is missing big guns, but people are coming in and knowing their roles.
Yeah. Geoff, can I just go back to the wicket-keeping? I mean, they couldn't just put Ben Folkes on a plane, could they? I mean, Smith is clearly a really talented, because Folkes is such a brilliant wicket-keeper, and actually that moment where Archer isn't bowling well, but he does get Travis Head's edge. Yep. And that is, I mean, not an easy catch for any of us, right? Pink ball, and it's going really fast, but it's regulation, you would say, for a top-line wicket-keeper. And if Smith is struggling with the bat as well, I mean, obviously they can't do that, but you sort of think when you put that up against how brilliantly Carey kept, and we kind of, when we analyse things, we do bowling and batting, we sometimes forget about wicket-keeping. Carey was unbelievable in this game, and to stand up to, I mean, Nisa's not rapid, but he's fast. To stand up to that is, and not miss anything is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and Carey is potentially an inspiration story for a keeper who's not that polished like Jamie Smith, because Carey wasn't when he first came into the job. He got criticised quite a bit for his keeping. There was a little running theme that it took a long time for him to get his first stumping in Test cricket. That didn't happen until they went to India in 2023. And he's worked so much on his glove work, even as a player who's getting older in his career. He's clearly developed so much as a keeper. The way he was going up and back to the stumps, the way he's keeping up to Nisa and Boland, who are not bowling military medium, they're bowling mid-130s on a kilometre per hour scale. So he has developed it, which means that, Jamie Smith could become that wicketkeeper. He's not that wicketkeeper now. I think that if Jamie Smith had been out here batting in 2017-18, he might have made 1 million runs, because the pitches were a lot flatter then and they would have suited his kind of bash through the line style. They're not that now. The ball moves more. It's harder to get in. You've got to do work early in your innings, and that doesn't seem like the kind of thing that suits his game.
And it suits Stokes. It suits Folkes, right? Folkes can do that. Ben Folkes is a proper bat, right?
But out of the squad they've got at the moment, they're probably not bringing someone in from across the world, because that's when it really looks like you're panicking. But Ali's suggestion is a sound one, where maybe you do take Pope down the order, you give him the chance to try to express himself in a more counter-attacking role lower down. And even if it was Stokes who went up to number 3 as maybe the most technically correct player, and one who, yes, he has to bowl, but he doesn't necessarily have to bowl that much, and he can have some control over his overs. Some sort of option that gives you more solidity. At the moment, there is no solidity at number 3. It's a wet paper bag, and you just run through it and get into the middle order. So, it would be potentially good for Pope as well to give him a break, to give him a fresh start, to do something else and give him something else to concentrate on, because he looks mentally shot at the moment.
What about the bowling attack, Jim? How could England change that?
Well, Stokes suggested that there might be some changes coming with with some of his comments after the match. I guess there was the whole pillow gate with Joffer. He turned up with his pillow, and lots of ex-Aussie gnarled pros in the commentary box are sort of staring down and giving him absolute pelters for that.
I've never slept with a pillow. Pillows are for wimps. Yeah.
You just turn my spikes upside down and sleep on the spikes.
And so, Ponting and Matt Hayden were basically saying, if that happened in their day, they would make that guy's feet bleed by, just making him bowl all day and never getting him off the park for a nap and that sort of thing. And then I think that there is something in the why you're only bowling fast now champion sort of thing with Archer, because that day, I hate to go back to that day before, but I think he only bowled 5 overs across the day. I think he bowled a 5-over spell in the morning and then wasn't used again. And he is, a guy capable of bowling at 95 miles an hour, and he wasn't seen in the afternoon trying to break that partnership with the game and the Ashes on the line potentially. And I wonder if Stokes doesn't really know how to use him, because Stokes' captaincy has been a bit passive, and since Perth, where Travis Head did what Travis Head did, Stokes has looked a bit sort of shaken, I think, in his captaincy, and a bit indecisive. And yesterday we saw when Archer was doing his spell under lights, albeit Australia only chasing 65, there were some funky fields. There was 4 men behind square, 2 on the off, 2 on the leg, and he was obviously trying to knock Steve Smith's helmet off, and he was had a point to prove, but we didn't really see too much of that from Stokes in that really flat day in the field, with his bowlers and with his field settings. When you think back to Pakistan and some of the things they were doing, some of the funky field settings, some of the wow, this really isn't Alistair Cook or Andrew Strauss or even Joe Root, bless him, as captain. This is a new guy who's got new theories and tactics, and isn't afraid to look stupid or do sort of crazy things with the field. That there wasn't really any of that, and so the bowling was bad. Bryden Carse got shipped for an awful amount of runs and was just slamming it into the pitch relentlessly. And I don't know whether that was a plan, or Stokes was telling him to do something else and he couldn't do it. Stuart Broad made some interesting comments in the commentary box for Seven. I think he said, when you can't find your radar, sometimes it's quite good to just go to a bouncer policy, because that's a definite plan. You know what you're doing, and it often does dry up the run rate. But it seemed like Carse maybe went to that to try and get a bit of control and dry up the runs, but Australia were just picking him off and slapping him away. So that was a really grueling watch that day.
So Ali, what could England do? Josh Tongue, Matthew Potts?
Yeah, I mean, Josh, they are the two seamers in the squad that haven't been used yet. Josh Tongue would present. I mean, he has the ability to bowl some magic deliveries. I guess the question for him is the run rate. He will ship runs. He historically has shipped a lot of runs with it, and so that is one area that if you're bringing him in, then it may be a straight swap for Carse. Carse being England's leading wicket taker, maybe that's slightly misleading, as you say, because he's sort of been quite scattergun. And Matthew Potts is a player who would be, he's sort of the sort of low 80s on the speed gun. He gets a reputation as a workhorse, as the guy that's as fit as a butcher's dog, and that he will bowl sort of all day and what have you. The only problem with that is that a lot of this was said before he made a one-off appearance in the third test in New Zealand last year, and he was blowing out of his arse after about 2 days. So
he also got sunstroke in Durham. Do you remember that? On that really hot day in Durham, he got sunstroke. So
yeah. So that would be a slight concern. But and the fact is that they are probably going to have to freshen up the bowling. I would expect Josh Tongue to come in. The big concern is on the spin front. Is if that Stokes is. Both teams essentially have got their number one spinner not playing in that pink ball test, and both to a certain degree have said that they will be playing in the next one. Now with Nathan Lyon, that's just a given in Adelaide, but with Shoaib Bashir, he's gone off to play for the Lions, and at the time of chatting, I don't know, I don't think Australia are going to bat again, but he went wicketless in that inning, so that is a big concern. The project player that they've kind of been hot housing for 2 years, disrupted by injury in the summer, notwithstanding, but that is a big concern for England in terms of the spin option that they will need in Adelaide isn't necessarily there.
Worth saying, Geoff, I mean, Michael Neser came in, there was lots about Lyon being dropped. He wasn't happy. He went on Channel 7 and was like, I'm really pissed off about this. It was very funny. But kind of justified. I mean, he may have got that partnership with Stokes and Jacks earlier, but Neser did brilliantly, and he's a great story, actually, Michael Neser. And it was great for him to have such a great test.
Well, Lyon, would have been called upon much earlier on that day when that partnership was sticking in there and things were drifting along. That's exactly the kind of position that a spinner is picked for, and I think he should have played instead of Brendan Doggett, who hasn't had much chance to show what he can do because they just made Doggett bowl bouncers, and he's not a bouncer bowler in Shield cricket. But Neser was allowed to do what Neser does in Shield cricket for Queensland at the Gabba and has done for years, which is put it on an immaculate length and a very consistent line. How often did Neser get clipped off the pads? Never. How often did he get driven? Almost not at all. The length was there, and for all that there was talk about, this pitch is pretty flat because Starc and Boland batted for a long time, Neser kept getting a little bit of seam movement, a little bit of lateral movement off the pitch. Not much, but it didn't need to be much. And that's what gets the inside edge that smashes Ben Stokes in the box. That's what gets the outside edge that carries to slip where Steve Smith can take that catch. And that's what gets the tiny little feather, the scratch on Stokes' bat that Carey's able to catch standing up to the stumps. So that's what Neser has done for years and years and years. He's played 3 test matches in 4 years. He's been on the bench so often. In recent times, he hasn't even been in the squads because they kind of go, we know what he can do. We'll bring him in if required. And then he came back into the squad for this series and was able to get this game. Will he play again in the series? Only if there are injuries. Cummins gets back, Lyon gets back. Starc and Boland have primacy in terms of the other spots there. But if somebody goes down in injury, I suspect that Neser will be the one to come in rather than Doggett at this point.
He did get driven a couple of times, Geoff, and the ball went straight back into his hands.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But yeah, the following day, the following day, it was 10 singles in 8 overs, I think, before he got the wicket of Jacks. It was just an absurd an absurdly consistent the display of control. And like you say, you look at England bowling a lot faster, but all over the place. You don't actually need to, it turns out. And on Australian pitches these days, Scott Boland doesn't bowl that quickly either, but he bowls fast enough and he puts it in the right spot and he moves it off the seam. So, who would have thought?
And then you have Mitchell Starc, who's got 18 wickets in. That's the most since, I think, Shane Warne in 94, 95 in the first 2 tests. Cummins probably to come back in, Jim. How much hope do we have for Adelaide? But we're only 2-0 down. There's 3 tests to go. It could, can we finish with hope and positivity? I mean, I'll end with you, Geoff. Don't worry. So you can bring us back down to earth. But can I get some hope and positivity at all? Maybe they've learned. I feel like this is Groundhog Day, and if I listen back to the review of the preview of the second test, but maybe they've learned. They've watched Stokes dig in. They'll treat their own wicket with the respect that it deserves, and Adelaide will get 500 for 4 in 3 days.
Okay, shall I go full on jingoism and say we're going to win 3-2, which is England have never come back from 2-0 down before, but this is the time.
Nobody has. One team ever has done it.
England definitely have the players to have some success down here, but unfortunately, at the minute they're not performing. So maybe there was enough in that final day performance here in Brisbane that the other players, your Harry Brooks and a few of the other guys, will say, right, well, our necks aren't necessarily on the line, but maybe our boss's necks are on the line, and we really do need to step up and perform here. So there's sort of. There's a chance that there's a slight reversion. I don't want to say the phrase "Bazball with brains" because it makes me feel ill, but maybe there will be some more thinking cricket on display in Adelaide with the series all but gone. I guess that's the big disappointment. It's like, why do you have to go 2-0 down before you start using your noodle a bit? But there is hope. There's always a little bit of hope whilst the series is alive.
It's alive, Ali, isn't it?
It's not dead. There is a pulse. It's a faint one. I suppose hope comes from the fact that we are now entering the part of the series where they are playing actual test cricket. They're not playing on a trampoline in Perth. They're not playing this confected disco cricket under lights. This is going to be
these don't count. These first 2 don't
proper
count.
test cricket. Exactly. There will be. This is a 3-test series. It starts at 0-0. All England have to do is just sweep it 3-0. So no, look, the Ashes won't be changing hands, I don't suppose. But I do think there is still scope for England to win a live test match, and I think winning a live test match is possibly what it will take for people to stay in jobs, because the pressure is on now.
Geoff?
Yeah, I think there is something to what Ali says, and I think if I were Ben Stokes, I would be taking that line. I'd go into that dressing room and say, we're playing a 3-test series, and what would we expect to do in that? We would expect to thump these jokers 3-0, and that's what we're going to do. The first 2 were free hits. We could have got something out of them. We weren't likely to. They didn't favour us. Doesn't matter. Forget about it. They were free swings. Now the real quiz starts, and now we go out there and win the next 3. I mean, that might be naive, but the fact that, look, Crawley's made runs, Root's made runs, Brook knows he has a job to do in Adelaide, where it's not the old Adelaide batting wicket of years past, so don't be fooled by that. It's not 2006. It's not going to be huge scores. The surface does a fair bit more than it used to do even in a day game. But Australia have showed what you need to do to win a test match here. You bat for 5 sessions and you make 500. That is what you have to do. 300 isn't enough. You might win a game with 300, but you can't expect to. You bat 5 sessions, you almost guarantee that you put yourself in a position where you run the game. So that's the first thing for England. Then it doesn't really matter what the makeup of their bowling attack is if they've got that to work with. There is the Crawley. The way of looking at that, I might pin this one back on Jim Wallace, who said, well, if he makes a score, you drop him immediately because it's like the fruit machine just paid out. You quit while you're ahead. But if he hasn't made a huge score, he's made a 70, so maybe that means that there is a big score somewhere along the line. And if he can pull that together and Root can do what he did, follow on from what he did in Brisbane, then you've got a chance. But England have to run a game with the bat, and that is the only way that they're going to get into this series. That has to happen at Adelaide.
But that 76 from Crawley was the sort of medium sort of payout that keeps the person putting the coins back in. You know?
Exactly.
That was the cherries.
Exactly.
It wasn't the bar. It was just the cherries. Now you say England need to bat for 5 sessions. Have they batted for 5 sessions yet in these 2 tests? I don't know. Anyway, there's competition for this podcast. I met a nice man called Tom in a cafe whose 10-year-old and his mate Gary and Bing, they calling themselves, are doing a podcast called The Short Legs. So if you want more, they have to say things like, "We missed the first session. We were at school." I quite like the honesty of that. But yeah, good luck to them until they get good at it, and then don't come for our jobs. But yes, go and find that one. And Chris says, "Will you be joining the Barmy Army at the Boxing Day test at the MCG? I'm off to day 3. Who will young Ian Rushden support growing up?" Listen, the dream is to get both of my sons, Ian and Willie, through the Australian sporting system, mullets, big Australian accents, and they can open the batting for England. That's the dream, but whatever they want to do.
Send them to Great Witchingham to have a pop at some plumbers.
I've already sent them there now at 3.5 and 10 months. Just to, Jake Weatherall can sort out their sleep as well. There's no time for sleep. There's no pillows for my kids anymore. Anyway, but look, thank you everybody. That'll do for today. We will look ahead to the Adelaide test next. Cheers, Ali.
Cheers, Max. Onwards.
Thank you, Geoff.
Ciao from Brisbane.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. It's still alive.
Ashes Weekly is produced by Nick Harman. Our executive producer is Daniel Simo. The theme tune is by Rudy Zagadlo. Back before the 3rd test.